My daughter looked at the foot of her baby's hospital crib and told me to leave. She said it the way you tell someone to take out the trash, not angry, just finished with me. My hand tightened on a small rattle I'd carved from the cherry tree behind our old house. The tree my wife planted the week we found out Caroline was going to be a mother herself. Caroline looked at the rattle like it had wandered in off a stranger's porch. Then I heard footsteps behind me. The pediatrician I hadn't really spoken to in the first hour followed me out of the room, and she said 6 words. 6 words I'm going to repeat to you in a minute, because they changed everything that happened next. And what she said to me in that hallway was only the beginning of what my daughter and her husband were about to lose. If you've ever been told you're overreacting about something that mattered, hit subscribe. Because by the end of this story, you'll understand why I kept a notebook. Now let me tell you how we got here. I want to start with the smell. Her nursery smelled wrong the first time I walked into it. Not the baby powder smell, the kind of babies sound like in those commercials, the real kind. Sour milk, warm plastic, faint chemical tang of a humidifier working too hard for too long in a small room. The smell of a sink that had been wiped but not cleaned. I noticed it because my wife Marie taught me to notice things. She used to say a clean house doesn't smell clean. A clean house smells like whatever's living in it. And this room was supposed to be full of a 5-week-old girl named Eleanor. But what I smelled when I stepped through the doorway was a room that had been through more nights than its calendars had been changed. I am 64 years old. I retired from a fabrication shop 8 years ago. I have been a widower for 4. I still live in the same 1-story house I bought in '94. The one with the sagging porch and the cherry tree in the back that drops fruit into the gutters every June. Marie and I raised Caroline there. I still sleep on the same side of the bed. I still use her coffee mug. I keep it on the top shelf so I have to reach up for it, because reaching up makes me feel like she set it there. Caroline is my only child. She is 37, and until this past spring she was the best thing I'd ever helped make. I put her through nursing school on co-signed loans. I am still paying extra principal on every month. I refinanced my house in 2014 to give her and her husband a down payment on the first place. I gave them my truck when her husband lost his job that year. The same 2003 Ranger that still sits in my driveway because they replaced it with something newer 6 months later and never offered to bring mine back. I never said a word. I was proud to be useful. That is the kind of father I wanted to be. The kind you don't have to feel sorry for. Her husband Russell is a different story. He owns a regional dental practice now, 3 locations, mostly implants and cosmetics. He did not start there. He started at a folding table in Caroline's apartment with a website he built himself. I loaned him $12,000 the month they got married. He paid me back in 11 months, which I respected at the time. It was the only thing I respected about paying back money. People who owe you money should not look like they are doing you a favor by returning it. Russell dresses like a man who is always about to be photographed. Caroline used to call me Daddy. Now she calls me Dad in front of Russell, because he thinks it sounds more adult. I noticed that the same month Eleanor came home from the hospital. I am a small Dels man. Small details are how you find the place where the truth lives. The baby was born April 14th, a Tuesday, in the same hospital where Marie died. They put me in the waiting room. I had a small rattle in my jacket pocket. I had carved it from a piece of cherry off the tree behind the house. I'd sanded that rattle twice a week from January to April. I told myself I was making something Eleanor would hold when she was older. I was telling myself the truth, actually. I was making something so that some part of Marie existed in that baby's hands. Caroline held that rattle against her cheek in the recovery room and looked at me like I was her father again. I'd remember that look for a long time, because it would be one of the last ones. Then we went home. Then the hospital smell left, and the real smell began. The first night I babysat, 2 weeks after Eleanor was home, I drove over because Caroline had asked. I told her I'd bring groceries. She said no, Russell had it covered. She said come anyway. So I came anyway. The house looked like a magazine that had been staged by someone who hadn't slept in it. Unopened boxes from a baby brand subscription, still sitting by the door with the labels facing out for pictures. The kitchen had a $400 espresso machine next to a half-cleaned bottle warmer. Theater lighting in every room. None of it looked lived in. What scared me was not the lighting. What scared me was what was missing. There was no rocking chair in the nursery. There was a $700 crib, a $400 bassinet, and a $300 sound machine, but no chair where you sat and held a baby and learned her breathing. There was no place where you could have been the night before. There were no clean onesies in the dresser. The top drawer had 3 folded. The bottom drawer had a pile that had been washed with cold and damp dried. There were 5 bottles on the drying rack and only 3 with their caps on. This is not the image of a house where a baby is being cared for by people who are awake when she is awake. I picked Eleanor up. She felt lighter than babies are supposed to feel in the first weeks. I changed her diaper. I noticed 2 small purple-yellow marks on the inside of her left thigh. Bruises, but the kind of bruises a newborn shouldn't have. I noticed her fingernails were too long. I noticed her breathing. It would be fine, then stop for a half second, then catch. Not crying, hiccup, stop. A different stop. When she was 3 weeks old, my daughter and her husband hadn't even mentioned cutting her fingernails. They hadn't even noticed they were long. That's when I started writing dates in the back of my gardening notebook. I didn't say anything that night. I went home. I called Caroline the next morning. "Hon, the baby stopped breathing a couple of times last night." "That's normal," she said. "Russell looked it up. Can you take her in? Just a checkup." "Dad, the pediatrician said at 4 weeks she was fine. You don't need to worry." "I'm not worrying, sweetheart. I'm asking." Her voice got small. Then she said, "Russell thinks you're anxious." "I am anxious. I'm anxious because she stops breathing. He says you should talk to someone." "Honey, I have talked to someone. For 38 years. I have talked to your mother, and she would want me to call you back and ask a second time. So I am asking a second time." She didn't take her in. I didn't push. That was my first mistake, and I knew it as I was making it. Pushing forward and pushing hard, those are not the same thing. That was March 12th, then April 4th. I drove over again. I watched Eleanor the whole afternoon while Caroline showered and Russell went to a meeting. I counted 4 breathing pauses in 2 hours. 2:11, 2:48, 3:09, 3:43. Pauses were not the same. 1 was a hiccup, 3 were not. I took a short video on my phone, only 3 seconds, of her sleeping. She's still, then she catches. I sent the video to Caroline. No response. I called. Russell picked up. "Vincent." He calls me Vincent. "Russell, did Caroline get that video?" "We saw it." "What did you think?" "She's a baby. They breathe like that." "They do not breathe like that. You can bring it up at her next visit. Caroline will call you." I hung up. I stood in my kitchen and I looked at my wife Marie's coffee mug on the top shelf, and I whispered to her what I'd been feeling. "Marie, I think our girl is in trouble." Not the kind of trouble she can see. Kind that happens in the gap between what they post and what's actually happening in that room. I went home and started writing things down in that black notebook. Every date. Every time I sat with Eleanor. Every pause. Every mark on her skin that wasn't there the week before. Every time Caroline brushed past my concern. I started taking screenshots of my text threads with Caroline, full conversations dated. I did not do this to be clever. I did it because I am 64 years old, and I was taught by a woman who died of breast cancer before 2 rounds of chemo took her hair, that you write it down because one day someone will tell you it didn't happen. My therapist is a woman named Julie. Julie cried on the phone with me the morning of the funeral. She has listened to every breathing pause story I brought her for 6 months. She's the only other person in the world who knows what's in that black notebook. In March she said to me, "Vincent, if no one else is going to take this seriously, you are going to have to be the one to escalate before something happens." Something happened June 7th, a Tuesday night. Caroline called me at 11:42 p.m. Her voice was a whisper. "Dad, Eleanor is making a sound." "What kind of sound?" "Like she's choking on air." I was in my truck in 11 minutes. I keep the Ranger parked facing out so I never lose a second. I drove the 11 miles in 12 minutes. When I got there, Russell was pacing with Eleanor in his arms, and Caroline was on the phone with a triage nurse on speaker. Eleanor was breathing, but she was doing it the way an old dog breathes. Short and far between, every inhale a little negotiation. She had a thin gray ring around her lips. Russell looked at me. Don't do this, son." Hand her to her mother. "Dad, this is exactly what I'm talking about." "Russell, I'm not doing anything." The baby is breathing every 6 seconds. That is what I'm doing. We took Eleanor to Children's. Caroline rode in the back. I watched Eleanor from the passenger seat. Twice more in those 11 miles. She didn't breathe for what felt like a year. I kept my hand on her chest the way a man who held his wife's hand until the doctor said there was nothing left to hold learns to do. You learn to count. You learn to wait for the catch. You learn that the catch might not come, and you keep waiting anyway. At the hospital, the team met us at the door. Pediatric resident, 2 nurses, a respiratory therapist. They took Eleanor from Caroline before Caroline could even step inside. Russell did what Russell does in a waiting room. He put his phone on the counter and answered emails. I sat in the room with Eleanor for most of the hour. Caroline went to the bathroom twice. At one point, Russell stepped out to make a call that lasted 7 minutes. Once he came back in, he said to me in the hallway, "Vincent, you cannot keep doing this." "Doing what, Russell?" "Manufacturing emergency." "Son, the baby's lungs just stopped working in my truck." "I did not manufacture that. You drove over here because Caroline was scared, and now we're in a hospital." "The baby is in a hospital because she stopped breathing." "She stopped breathing because she got worked up." "She was worked up because Caroline was upset." "Caroline was upset because you were in the house." That sentence hit me in a place I didn't know I had. I stood in the hallway in my barn coat with Marie's rattle in the inside pocket. I held the wall with one hand. I let his words ring through me like a bell. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The truth would not need volume. Then the pediatrician came in. Her name was Dr. Reyes. She was small, soft-spoken, and asked questions like a person who had been pushed into a corner by someone else in the room. She looked at Caroline first, then at Russell, then at me. She sat on a rolling stool and apologized for the smallness of the room. That is what good doctors do. They apologize for things that aren't their fault. She asked Caroline about Eleanor's sleep. Caroline said Eleanor slept on her stomach because Russell had read that back sleeping was a myth. Dr. Reyes let that pass. She asked about feeding. Caroline said Eleanor had started a sleep training app Russell's cousin recommended, which limited night feeds. Dr. Reyes let that pass. She asked about who had been watching Eleanor during the day. Caroline said a rotating roster, mostly Russell's sister-in-law, mostly evenings. Dr. Reyes let that pass. She never interrupted them. She never accused them. She just let them fill the room with answers that didn't match anything I had watched over 4 months. At one point, Russell checked his watch. That is the most Russell thing Russell has ever done. I sat in a chair in the corner of the room. I had my black notebook in my lap. I had Marie's rattle in the other pocket. I was quiet because the quietest thing in the room had always been my job. Then Caroline asked to step out to take a call from her sister. Russell followed her. Dr. Reyes looked at me with a question in her eyes that wasn't a clinical question. It was the kind of question a person asks when they need to know what's not on the chart. Then Russell said in the hallway, "She needs her rest. Let's wrap it up." Dr. Reyes stood. She said to me very quietly, "Can I speak with you for 30 seconds? We stepped into the hallway. We stood under a sign that said Respiratherapy. She looked at me. She looked at her clipboard. She looked back at me, then she said 6 words. "Tell me from the first week." And just like that, she gave me the room. Not the room of her exam, the room of being heard. She didn't accuse. She didn't quote the chart. She asked me to start at the beginning. I started at the beginning. I told her about March 12th and the first pauses I saw. I told her about April 4th and the video I'd sent and the bruises I'd noticed on Eleanor's thigh that morning. I told her about the small purple-yellow marks on her arm that weren't there the week before. I told her how the family group chat had gone silent. The week Caroline told me my texts made her anxious. I told her I'd driven 11 minutes because my daughter had whispered on the phone at 1:45. She did not interrupt me once. She wrote 3 things on her pad. The number of pauses I'd counted on April 4th, the bruises, the April video. Then she said, "I'd like to see that video, Mr. Holloway, and I'd like to see any other records you may have. Tomorrow morning, before discharge rounds, I'll bring them. Take care of yourself tonight." She walked back into the room and closed the door behind her. I stood under the respiratory therapy sign for a long time. Then I felt the rifle cold of Marie's rattle against my ribs, and I understood the moment I had been afraid of, and I understood I was going to do exactly what Margaret Holloway would have told me to do if she were standing here with her hand on my elbow. I went home. I sat at the kitchen table. I pulled out the black notebook. I pulled out the printed screenshots. I pulled out the phone and queued up the April video. I spread everything out on the table, and I slept for 2 hours in the chair by the window with Marie's coffee mug on the top shelf, watching me from over the sink like a witness Marie had placed there herself. The next morning my daughter called. "Dad, Dr. Reyes wants to talk to me and Russell in 20 minutes. Could you come?" "Honey, I can be there. Don't bring anything." "Sweetheart, I'm going to bring the notebook." "Dad, please don't make this a thing. It's already a thing, Caroline. I made it a thing in March. You made it a thing in April. Russell made it last night. This thing has been a thing for 6 months. The only difference is now somebody in a building that doesn't have our last name is asking the questions." When I got to the hospital, Dr. Reyes met me in a small conference room before Caroline and Russell arrived. I set the black notebook, the printed screenshots, and the phone on the table. She read quietly. She did not gasp. She did not accuse. She asked 3 more questions. Then she said, "Mr. Holloway, what would you like to happen?" "I would like my granddaughter to go home with her mother." "And what would you like to happen with Russell?" "I would like him to stop deciding what my granddaughter breathes on." Dr. Reyes nodded. "I'm going to bring in the hospital's pediatric social worker. We're going to have a short family meeting. Your daughter and Russell need to hear what we have documented, but I want you here when they do. Because you're part of her history. You're not part of the problem." I sat in the conference room. I held the rattle in my pocket. I thought about the cherry tree behind the house. The one Marie planted the week we found out. Caroline was going to be a mother. I thought about how many nights I'd given that rattle the same kind of love Marie had given our daughter. I had not done this to be rewarded. I had done this because I had been trying to keep one small thing alive. Russell and Caroline arrived at 10:14 a.m. Caroline looked at me. Russell did not look at me. Russell looked at his watch. Then at the door the social worker was coming through. The social worker's name was Linda. She was 50-something, with reading glasses on a chain. She sat at the end of the table and put her hands together. "We are concerned about the timeline of care for Eleanor," Linda said. "We're concerned about the consistency of the information given to the PEL team versus what is in the chart versus what caregivers have observed outside the family. We're concerned about the bruises." She didn't say the word bruises like an accusation. She said it like someone placing a brick in a wall they were building. Russell's face did something I had never seen it do. He paled. Caroline started to cry. I did not speak. I sat with my hands on the table. The rattle was in my jacket pocket, no longer near my hand. I was listening. I was not going to do the thing Russell does, which is fill a room with the loudest sound in it. I was going to sit with the smallest. Linda continued. "Dr. Reyes has asked that Eleanor stay for an additional 24-hour observation period. While she's here, we need a safe discharge plan. We'll be setting up an in-home nurse visit for next week, and we need a family caregiver agreement, which both biological parents will sign." Russell said, "This is unnecessary. We're her parents." Linda said, "Mr. Holloway, when discharge planning involves any disagreement with a primary caregiver's statements, the hospital requires both parents and one external family member to sign the discharge agreement. This is hospital protocol. Why? Because the hospital's job is to make sure this baby goes home to 1 Linda pulled a small file out of her bag. Inside were 4 pages printed on blue paper. She slid them across the table. They were 3 columns. Date. Reported by caregivers. Observed by external caregiver. March 12. Caregiver reports normal sleep cycles. Vincent records 3 apnea-like pauses in 90 minutes. April 4. Caregiver reports Eleanor breathes steadily. Video shows 3-second pause. Vincent records 4 pauses in 2 hours, one of them lasting 7 seconds. April 19. Caregiver reports no marks, no bruising. Vincent observes purple-yellow marks inside left thigh, additional small marks on right forearm. May 14. Caregivers report 8 hours uninterrupted sleep. Vincent notes pause pattern consistent with previously documented episodes. May 26. Caregivers decline on-site nurse visit. Vincent reports additional small bruise on left shoulder. June 6. Caregivers report no concerns. Vincent reports 11-second pause, witness without intervention. June 7, hospitalization. Caregivers report sudden episode. Vincent's timestamped entry at 11:42 p.m. Russell tried to read the file the way he had been trained to read spreadsheets. Fast, dismissing what was uncomfortable. He got halfway down the third page and stopped. Caroline was reading it slower. She was reading the names. She was reading the dates she had texted me. She was reading her own words back to herself. "So what are the bruises from?" she asked, in a small voice only her father would recognize. Linda said, "That's what we're going to find out. They're nothing. They are from the delivery. They are from the baby being held. They are from sleeping on her side. 2 of them are 4 days apart and not in symmetrical positions, Mrs. Holloway." Russell looked at Caroline. Caroline looked at Russell. Then Caroline looked at me. "Did you write this down because Russell told me to stop talking to you about it?" "I wrote it down because you and Russell were telling me my granddaughter was fine, and her body was telling me she wasn't, and you didn't want to hear it." "I didn't not want to hear it. You emailed me on April 19th and used the word anxious, Caroline. That is not wanting to hear it. That is telling me to stop saying it. The doctor listened to me because I had it in writing, and I had it in writing because you and Russell told me I was the problem. If you'd listened in March, I'd never have had to write it down." Caroline's hand went to her mouth. She didn't cry this time. She was the quiet kind of upset you only become when someone you love has done what you were too afraid to do for them. Russell stood up again. Linda didn't look at him. She looked at Caroline. "Mrs. Holloway, we need a decision from you, not from your husband." Caroline said. "I'll sign," Russell said. "Caroline, Russell, I will sign." He looked at me. I looked at the wall. I wasn't going to take his face. The discharge agreement was signed by both parents and by me, because I am the only family member outside the immediate household listed as a known safe contact. That is not a phrase I made up. That's a form. They have forms. I am on the form. At 5:18 p.m., Eleanor and Caroline went home. Russell went to clean out a spreadsheet on his laptop. I drove home in the Ranger alone, with Marie's rattle in the inside pocket of my barn coat. I made coffee in Marie's mug. I sat at the kitchen table. I looked at the cherry tree through the window. I finished the rest of the second rattle I had started in April. The one I had only started because I had been afraid my first one wouldn't make it back to me. I rubbed it down with beeswax. Cherry smelled the way cherry smells, like the inside of a piano. I called Caroline that night. She picked up on the first ring. "Dad, hey sweetheart. I'm sorry. You don't owe me an apology, baby. You owe yourself one. Are you going to be at my house Wednesday?" "Yes, I'll bring a spoon for you to feed her cereal." "Dad, she can't have cereal yet, you'll see." The doctor gave her a green light today. You didn't hear her say it, but she did she? She said she's cleared for introducing small bites of soft food with caregiver supervision. I was listening. Caroline laughed. It was the only laugh I had heard from her since Eleanor was born. I hung up. I held Marie's rattle. I sat at the kitchen table. The cherry tree was quiet. The coffee mug was warm. The black notebook was still on the table where I'd left it. In July, Russell left for 2 weeks on a dental conference trip. I drove over on Wednesday the way I have every week since the meeting at Children's. I sat in the kitchen with Caroline while she fed Eleanor a small amount of mashed banana. Eleanor made the kind of face a baby makes when something is wrong and she doesn't know it yet, and she doesn't yet know she can tell you. Caroline laughed. Eleanor laughed. I sat with my second rattle on the table and let it be there. In August, Eleanor rolled over. Caroline sent me a video. It was 14 seconds of a baby mid-wiggle. I watched it 17 times. The pauses in her breathing had stopped. The bruises were gone. She gained 2 pounds. She gained a grandmother's name from her mother, who began saying it at night when she put Eleanor down. In September, on a Sunday, Caroline came over alone. She sat at the kitchen table. She drank from Marie's mug, which I had put on the table without saying a word. She held Marie's rattle in her lap. "Dad, I'm thinking about what Russell said about Russell." "Which part?" "He said he was protecting me from postpartum depression by limiting the information I was getting." "He did not protect you from postpartum depression. He protected himself from accountability, Dad." "I'm not saying it in anger, sweetheart. I'm saying it because I'm 64, And I have lost the people I love the most, and the only thing I have left to give them is accurate sentences. She put the rattle down on the table next to the mug. Will you keep showing me how to do this? Do what, baby? Notice things. I reached up and put Marie's mug back on the top shelf. Caroline stood and put it back on the table. She said, "She belongs down here now." I sat at the kitchen table that night, with my granddaughter's grandmother's rattle next to my granddaughter's mother. The cherry tree dropped fruit in the gutter. The notebook was still on the table. I am going to keep it there. The notes I am adding now are not the notes I had to write in March and April and May. They are notes about Wednesday. Wednesday, July 12. Eleanor ate mashed banana and laughed at the cat. Wednesday, July 19. Caroline fed her in Marie's chair. Eleanor grabbed the spoon. Wednesday, August 2. Eleanor rolled over. Caroline cried. Russell was not there. There will be more Wednesdays. Let the record show, I am not going to lie and tell you everything got solved. Russell is still Russell. He'll find another spreadsheet. Caroline is going to have to put her own foot down 100 times in the next year. And 100 of those times I am not going to be in the room. But I am going to be in her house 3 days a week. I am going to feed Eleanor sugar-free oatmeal with a small spoon in my grandmother's bowl. I am going to hold her when she stops breathing without waving a phone in front of her. Because she isn't stopping breathing anymore, but if she did, I would not be the kind of father who waited for an adult in scrubs to tell me to take my hand off his grandchild's chest. I am going to keep the rattle. I am going to put it on my kitchen table on Wednesdays when Caroline brings the baby over. It will sit there next to Marie's coffee mug. The cherry tree will drop fruit in the gutter. I am going to teach my granddaughter when she is old enough that her mother made her, that her grandmother planted the tree, that her grandfather carved the rattle out of love and out of fear and out of the one rule Marie left me with. You write it down, because one day someone will tell you it didn't happen. I am not going to let anyone tell me it didn't happen. The hospital form is in the kitchen drawer next to the black notebook. The doctor's name is on the discharge summary in the laundry room. The fact that no one has apologized is in the form of a Wednesday I show up for that no one has asked me to skip. I am a 64-year-old welder with a notebook and 2 cherry rattles, and a mug that belongs to a woman who would have done exactly what I did. And the difference between that pediatrician and every other adult in my granddaughter's life is that the doctor didn't decide. She already knew what was going to happen. The doctor asked. And when she did, my granddaughter got a Wednesday. A real Wednesday. A Wednesday with a soft spoon and a rattle made of cherry, and a grandfather who kept his receipts. And a granddaughter who got to keep her mother, who got to keep her breath, who got to keep being a baby in a house where somebody finally listened. If this story hit you, subscribe. And tell me in the comments, who in your life kept receipts because no one else was going to? I'll see you on the next one.